All right, welcome into another episode of Carps Corner. And sorry, it's a little late getting out. I usually like to have these things out Sunday night, and it's Monday evening. Here's the problem: um, got work going on in our house, noise everywhere, construction everywhere. My office is a mess. House is a disaster right now. We're trying to navigate this season and deal with some of this stuff. So I've got to deal with this for at least the next couple weeks as we slowly kind of work our way and get this thing done. Um, Great game for Ohio State. Take down the Badgers 52-21. I don't even think the game was as close as the score indicated. It's 31-7 at the half. There's a time where it's 45-7 in the game. And we talked about a couple of goals coming into the game. What to watch for, what Ohio State needed to do. Number one, stop the run. Number two, protect CJ Stroud. And then the competitive stamina, as much for the fans, if anything. Now, fans kind of waned a little bit with their energy, but hey, you know what? That's okay because it was an absolute beatdown. It was a blowout. And so you can't expect that type of energy or that type of juice when it's 31-7 at halftime. But as to stopping the run, let's take a dive inside how Ohio State was able to stop the run. And because there were out some guys, Lathan Ransom didn't play. Josh Proctor was back in there. Tanner McAllister back in as well. We'll get to those guys and what they did as well. One with some big people in some different situations, bigger safeties to get some more bodies on the field. You saw Court Williams out there. I believe he's rocking the number 1. You saw Sonny Styles out there as well doing some things. So there's some different guys that they got in there, some younger guys, and we'll get into that all as well. But just some, top line numbers here from the rushing attack. If you look at it, the one rush for 75 yards. Braylon Allen subbing in and out. He rips off a 75-yarder. If you remove that, because that's inconsequential, it's garbage yards and there's substitutions going on. And not that you ever drop the standard. I'm not saying that. But in real competitive game minutes, how did it look? So you take that out of it. 34 rushes, 112 yards. I believe at one point, they had like 65 yards rushing. It was an absolute destruction. And so 3.4 yards per carry, really good by the Jim Knowles defense. Defense that we were concerned against a physical Wisconsin attack. Would they be able, excuse me, would they ultimately be able to hold up? I'm sorry. Would they ultimately be able to hold up? I think they answered that question. One. He brought it up, after the beat downs last season when Michigan put it to Ohio State, when Utah was able to run the ball a lot, starting at the season with Oregon. Ryan has preached this toughness element, stopping the run and being able to run the football. And so when you're playing a team like Wisconsin, that's what they want to do. They want to come in and establish an identity. They want to keep a close game, and they want to make sure they can run it, slow you down, keep it tight, and force you ultimately to maybe make a mistake. And that's how Wisconsin, was probably their plan, their strategy to beat Ohio State. Not all that different from Notre Dame. Problem is, you look at Ohio State's defense, what they were able to do. Like I said, 3.4 yards per carry if you take out the 75-yarder that was in garbage time. The frontline defense did a fantastic job. Jim Knowles called a great game. Enough pressure, enough movement to be able to ultimately confuse the Badgers. And then you saw this guy, Tommy Eichenberg, flying around, 14 tackles, absolutely was all over the place. Steel Chambers had a good game as well. Saw Cody Simon in there. Those guys, the linebackers, held up their end of the bargain. Defensive line squeezed stuff down, and that was big. So they did a really, really nice job in the front. But Tommy Eichenberg, it's him and Steele. They go back and forth every week. Like one guy played great this week. The next guy, he's the MVP. And so as you go back and forth and you see all this stuff, the linebacker play for Ohio State has been absolutely tremendous. And it's something that, I pride myself on having played it. So be able to watch those guys go out there and impact the game in a really big way. So they're able to stop the run. Boom. That box was checked. Protect CJ. Now, outside of him not really getting touched, he throws the one interception later over the top. But I mean, CJ had all day to throw. He had opportunities. He could sit back, relax, have a cup of coffee, and he was able to find 4 different receivers. Didn't really spread the ball around that much. It was more of a running game. But CJ had all kinds of time, and they weren't able to get any pressure. Talking to some of the guys up there, they didn't think the front for Wisconsin was very good at all. Not nearly as physical as what they had seen on film. So they were kind of disappointed a little bit. So Notre Dame's front was much better. Foskey was much better than Herbig. I mean, for a guy that's supposed to be an All-American, there was not a whole lot of plays that he was involved in and didn't really impact the game in a meaningful way, at least as I saw. And I went back and just watched the game again today. And so you saw Cade Stover wearing him out on the outside, holes being opened up huge on the inside. And it was a pretty darn impressive job. And so allow CJ to throw it out there and just really sling it to whoever. One of his favorite targets, Emeka Egbuka, obviously had a huge game. We keep going back to Cade Stover. And for a guy who's played 3 different positions at Ohio State, played defense in the spring, was defensive end, moved back, linebacker, tight end, doing all this different stuff. And a couple guys cover the NFL call me like, dude, Cade Stover looks like an NFL tight end. Well, yeah. He's big, he's fast, he can run, he's got good hands. You're seeing that athleticism now. And by the way, he's a dominator with an edge up front. So you see all 5 of them getting up front and boom, just mowing people down. The lanes that Mayan and Travion had to run through were massive. And there was a nice surge. Like Justin Fry should pat himself on the back. He has coached the heck out of those guys. Like I said, Wisconsin, if they were known for one thing, they're known for toughness. And that wasn't there. Their guys weren't all that talented, but they've always been tough. They've always been fighters. And our offensive line, the Buckeyes were able to root them out and drive them any which way they wanted. And that's why you have 200-yard backs. Travion going 21 for 121. Mayan going 11 for over 100 yards, couple touchdowns. Like 2 contrasting styles. But as you're watching those guys get the ball, whoosh, 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 downhill, running physical, also being elusive. Tremendous job up front by the Buckeye offensive line. All 5 of them. It was a thing of beauty. CJ had all the time in the world, and the running lanes were massive. That's all you can ask for as an offensive coach. Because if you can do that, receivers will get open. Your running backs will find the lanes. That is a toughness thing, and that's something that Ryan Day has been preaching and preaching and preaching because he's looking forward to the end of the season and who you're going to be seeing there and how they ultimately played that team up north last year. Can you get a yard when you need a yard? Jim Knowles said, give me a yard and I'll defend it. That's all you need. And that's what you need to work on. And that's what this Ohio State team has been grinding at all spring, all fall, and now you're in camp and you're beginning to see the fruits of those labors. Now, Ryan Day, don't think it was a mistake. When you're playing a team that's known for toughness and running the football, that Ohio State came out and said, hey, we can throw it all over you guys. Wisconsin was missing 3 of their starting defensive backs. We can throw it all over you. We're going to come out and we're going to run it. We're going to set the tempo, and we're going to beat you at your game. The way that you want to play us, we're going to be better at it. And I give Ryan a lot of credit for this. You go back and you remember the loss in the semifinal to Clemson. Ohio State struggled in the red zone, had a hard time getting the ball across the goal line. Come back the next year, they play Clemson again. A million great red zone calls, some great plays, some new stuff, some tight end throwbacks, all these different things. Ryan solved the problem. This is the same situation. And it's a little bit of a troll job because when you're playing someone, they talk about toughness and Wisconsin talks about toughness and all these things. And then you go out there and it's not beating them by throwing the football. You beat them by running it on them, by doing to them what they were going to try to do to you. And so it was tremendous to see that. And so just be wary when when he's playing, Ohio State's playing someone, especially if they talk a lot and there's different points they want to try to make. Ryan likes to make him on the other side for him and just to prove to people the talent and everything that he ultimately has there. Other thing on his play calling, Ryan Day's play calling was tremendous. Some of the stuff that he did in the red zone, you're seeing the boots, you're seeing CJ move, the throwback to Cade, the little rollout, tuck down to Gabe on the boot. I mean, there was a lot of great calls that he ultimately had. He's put together a wonderful offense. You look at the diversity of play calling. They had some 13 personnel, 1 running back, 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. They can run it out of that. You see them, they'll eventually be able to throw and do some play action and stuff off of that. So he does it not only through diversity of play calling, but also through diversity of personnel group. And we've begun to see that, starting against Toledo and them starting to integrate it more and more. Some under center stuff, especially in short yardage. It forces teams to prepare differently. You got a team that in Ohio State, they can throw the ball all over the yard, but then they can also get in power formations and impose their will. In the Big Ten, it's nice. But when you start talking about the Bamas and the Georgias, that's the stuff that'll be able to impact them. And that's how you're able to get the offense rolling against a team like that, because of all of the different ways that you can play. So that was big time to be able to do that. Talked last week before the game, 2 guys to watch: Josh Proctor, Tanner McAllister. Sat out with some injuries the week before, small stuff, thought they'd be back. They were back, and in a big way. Proctor, I believe, had 6 tackles, played really well. Latham Ransom was battling something, so he stayed, played the whole game, did a really good job. Physical tackler, was in the right position. No one's playing a perfect game, but did a pretty darn good job. And then Tanner McAllister gets the interception there in the first quarter. Boom. Things started spinning around. And all of a sudden now, that's when the route was on. So both of those guys, missing the week before, did a great job coming back and being able to play. One other thing, wide receiver blocking. Very, very impressive with that. And you start looking at Emeka Egbuka, as good as receivers he is, man, he's a dominating blocker. Marvin Harrison Jr. gets after it. You see Julian Fleming also getting after it. Good to see him back in the fold, making some plays again. All 3 of those receivers are contributing at a really, really high level. And that's awesome to see. And they block for each other. They block for their running backs. Those are the things that make teams elite. And Brian Hartline would have it no other way. They're going to block because that's going to be part of it. And that's something he's going to make sure that they do. And in doing that, that's why you start to get those long runs. That's why you have those breakouts. That's why you're able to do what they did, running the football and also being able to throw the short game and the screen game, because those guys block so well for each other and they practice extremely hard. And there's a couple other guys I want to shed some light on for their performances out there. Maybe they didn't necessarily have all the stats, and light up the numbers, but you start talking about playing your 4th and 5th corner and ultimately what that looks like for most defenses. Most places it'd be a disaster. But thankfully, when there's injuries during training camp, it stinks. And it's hard to kind of get a beat and understand exactly who your best players are and how they're going to play and all this stuff, and how the team's going to mesh. But one of the silver linings of that is you get a chance to look at some young guys. And so we got to see J.K. Johnson play a little bit in the last few weeks, and he's done a good job. He's been the 4th corner there, and I think was making a push to be on the field a lot. And so you saw him when he was needed to be called to action, he was ready to go. And then Jair Brown, who, I don't think anybody thought he was going to play significant snaps this season. We start looking at the depth at the corner position. But when Denzel Burke's out, got a little hand deal, you got Cam Brown out, and then Jordan Haycock's been out for an extended period of time, all of a sudden it fell on those guys. They had to be the ones that stepped up and played. And while Wisconsin doesn't necessarily have the greatest passing attack, and they didn't try to attack them on the perimeter all that much, and I know there was the 1 PI penalty, which was bogus, but I thought those guys played really well. And it's going to be great for this team later this season, and then obviously on into the future, when you get young guys meaningful reps in a night game against a team that was the caliber of Wisconsin, at least what we thought they were coming in, because the pressure and the preparation and everything that goes into that is only going to make you a better player. And so getting those 2 young guys out there while the 3 older dudes were all out, awesome. They played really well. Then you saw Cam Martinez sliding in there later in the game. He's been playing a lot of inside, but he's next up to play outside. And I think that in a pinch, he could go out there and do it as well. And so we'll see kind of how these guys come back from injury. I think Denzel will be out a couple of weeks. Hopefully Jordan is getting ready to return. Mr. Herbie Hancock there, he's been battling some stuff since camp. I feel like he might be getting close. And then Cam Brown, it's going to be probably a week-to-week situation with him on when he's going to be able to come back and play. And hopefully, Cam's a veteran player. He's been around this thing for a long time. So I think he'll be fine. He knows his body. He understands it. And his ability to get back in there and go make some plays. But awesome for those guys. Not many teams would be able to put together a performance like that with their fourth and fifth corner. And then I mentioned also Lathan Ransom was out, so Proctor had to play, the lion's share of the game, and it's pretty good. Some young guys that also got in there. I mentioned this earlier. We're Court Williams in the game as well, but one of the things, the big people, the big personnel to be able to match Wisconsin when they got big. I talked last week. Might see some Cody Simon and some 3 linebacker sets. He's the third backer, getting him in there if you need to go get some stops and you feel like they're starting to push you around a little bit. And then there's also the big safety package where, you could get Tanner McAllister out of the game, who's more of a smaller defensive back, corner, inside corner type. And you go with one of these big dudes like Court Williams or Sonny Styles. And Sonny Styles got in the game. Now he missed the tackle, but listen, the guy's should be a senior in high school, reclassified. He physically looks the part. He's been having good practices. He is only going to get better with each day. And so he got in there. He passes the look test like everything you'd ever want to see. And it's exciting to see him get out there because of all of the hoopla surrounding his recruitment. Obviously, he's a Central Ohio kid from Pickerington, so it's exciting to have him stay at home. And then obviously the connection with his dad, being a Buckeye as well. So that was a big deal. And to see him on there, I'm like, I think that's Sonny right there. And the problem is you wouldn't even know it because he looks like he's probably about a junior physically right now anyway. Very developed kid, looks really good, and did some good things out there in the game. And I think you're only going to probably see him a little more as the season rolls on as well. Some things that happened around the Big Ten. I always like to kind of keep an eye on this, around the country too. University of Miami lost to Middle Tennessee State, so not a good situation for them. Arkansas ended up losing to A&M. They fell a bunch of spots. Tennessee beats Florida, so they're in the top 10 now. Big Ten's got 3 teams in the top 10, Ohio State, Michigan, 3 and 4. And then I guess right outside Penn State's at 11. And now Minnesota crept up in there. I think they're like 21 or 22. And the reason Minnesota slid in, huge victory over Michigan State. I mean, they were able to dominate that thing from start to finish, 34-7 in East Lansing. And there's going to be some soul searching going on up there with the Michigan State program. Mel Tucker, as they try to navigate that thing and figure out where everything went wrong. You lose to Washington, you get it beat up pretty good. And then you follow that up with losing to Minnesota and a team, the Michigan State, especially at home, had really owned Minnesota for, it feels like, the last decade and change. So big victory there for the Gophers. And they're my dark horse, honestly, to win the West. At this point, I mean, Wisconsin, we saw what they were on Saturday night. They're nothing to write home about. Iowa, well, they got a victory over Rutgers. Their defense still scored more than their offense with a couple of pick sixes that they had. So they're not what they normally are. People thought it could have been Nebraska this year. I mean, they fired their coach. So I think it's going to fall on Minnesota. So I'm all in on cheering on the Gophers so they'll be ranked as high as possible when they play, hopefully, Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. And they don't play Ohio State and they don't play Michigan in crossovers. So that'll bode really well, hopefully, for their rankings. And they can be, I don't know, a 12th or 13th ranked team when they ultimately get to Indy. And then the last game that I was watching, of pretty critical importance, team up north, welcoming in Maryland, the Terrapins. And Maryland's good. They've got Tua's brother, Tulea, the quarterback, Tagovailoa. They've got good skill position players, good receivers, which they've had before. And last year they were playing well until they were decimated by injury. And so I wanted to see how they would do and how Michigan would play against a team that you could say has better talent than anyone they faced. And Maryland was up 13-10. They were driving the ball. They were pushing them around up front. They ended up losing by a score. But this Maryland team is better than we think. And I think this Michigan team has some things to really work on. Now, you got J.J. McCarthy playing quarterback now, so he gives them a little bit of that athletic and playmaking boost from the quarterback position. But they still got a long way to go. Because I think Maryland's good, but I wouldn't define them as a great team. So they've got some work that ultimately needs to be done. And we finally saw them against an opponent who's going to win more than 3 games. And this Maryland team, they're in the Big Ten East, but I think they could probably beat Michigan State this year. Sweep. They're not beating the big 3 of Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, but their crossover games, I don't know who they are. I'll have to go look off the top of my head, but there's a good chance that Maryland team could win 8 games. I mean, they're pretty well coached. Loxley's doing a good job. So excited to see that. We'll have the mailbag on Wednesday, answer some more of your questions. You got Rutgers coming up, 3:30 kick. So we'll start getting into that this week and some other happenings and some injury updates and everything else. But thank you for doing this episode of Carps Corner. I appreciate it. Having fun with it. It's going to be crazy and chaotic and hectic in my house the next 4 to 6 weeks. But you know what? You wouldn't have it any other way. You got to live through it. Got to figure it out. Got to deal with it. And my office is a crazy mess right now. But thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, share it, comment. Love to interact with everybody. So thank you for watching this, and we'll talk to you soon.